Hey, that's all I needed. I just need one. That's fine. I appreciate that. First of all, some thank yous are in order. I thank Bob for teaching 2 weeks ago. And then I appreciate John on incredibly short notice teaching. Yeah, not preaching. And then I appreciate John on incredibly short notice teaching last week. I mean, I rarely ever get sick. Even when I had COVID, never felt a thing, blah, blah, blah. But last Saturday, about 6 o'clock, I started having fairly sharp stomach pains. And it might have been a week of my own fending for myself meal-wise. That was kind of coming into play. And so I alerted John that I might not be here Sunday morning, had a lesson. I actually should have said, if you want to stumble through what I prepared, feel free. But then I said, I'll let you know in the morning how I feel. And I woke up and I actually felt worse for a bit. So I texted him and he was gracious to take the class for me. And anyway, weird, out of nowhere. Since Sally came home the next day and everything was fine. Everything's been good. So we're finishing today this re-look at called Rediscovering Church after the book was written to point us in a direction of maybe a restart, a re-look at what church had been maybe before and maybe what we had an opportunity to do differently. We've looked at a lot of different topics within that, and some of them including everything from how do we view each other, how do we view outsiders, what does it mean to belong, all those things that really give us an opportunity to kind of stop and think. And today we're going to end with, and I thought it would be appropriate to go back and just look at what the scriptures say about aspects of church. And so we're going to, everything we're going to do today is going to look at 12 verses. And some of them are similar, some of them are not. I would like your comments on all of them. Where's Myron at? Here's Myron right here. Myron's our runner today. And again, next week we have 2 new classes starting. Is it just 2, Michael? Class with Dennis and here on sayings of Jesus. Okay, teachings of Jesus, focusing on the Sermon on the Mount, and the other one is Scott talking about grace. Scott's going to be having a class on grace. So both of them are outstanding options for us to be looking at. So, but if you choose the auditorium class next week, I talked about this 3 weeks ago, but of course that's a lot of time to forget. On Sunday morning, come a little closer. I guarantee you, Dennis will let you out 2 minutes early to go back and get your normal seats if you want to do that, just so it's a little easier for our runners to be able to do that if you possibly can. One of the things that when we look at what church looks like and what we're growing to look at what church looks like going forward, there's a lot of different options. A lot of different things have changed. Maybe some of you have visited different places in the last 2 years where you were familiar with going there before, and when you went back, it was a little bit of a different look of the way they were doing things. In some cases, it may be that they're not at all meeting at the building. Maybe they're doing things differently. Maybe it's that they've just never really stopped doing what they were doing before. But most people have had some tweaks to the way they were doing things. Some of them were, maybe you would say, are improvements now when we're back. But almost everybody has been forced to look at, okay, what's my relationship with my body of believers and how we do things, and how do I fit in that? And what's my responsibility, and what do I do that really makes me more effective, more of an example of what Jesus wants us to be? that particular thing. So we're going to start today with some verses. They're not in a particular order. They're kind of in just a little bit of a random order. And I'm going to read the verse, and I would like you to tell me what you think that really, how that you think that really kind of applies to what we're going to be doing with church going forward from 2,000 years ago, and how that really connects today. And maybe we'd lost sight of it. Maybe it's an opportunity to do a little bit differently. You tell me what that thinks. The first one is 1 Peter 1:22. So I'll give you a chance to, I like it when Richard's doing communion talks. He says, I'm going to give you a minute to get there, because it's two things. One, it gives us a minute to get there. And two, it's kind of forcing our hands a little bit to get there. So if you have your Bible, if you want to look at that, that would be great. 1 Peter 1:22, it says, now that you have purified yourselves by obeying the truth, so that you have sincere love for your brothers, love one another deeply from the heart. Okay, now a couple things in there. First of all, what do you think he's talking about when he says, when you purify yourselves? How do we purify ourselves so that we look at each other and love each other more? What does that purification involve?
I would say it involves looking at our own sin first and purifying ourselves, trying to connect with God, and then being able to help our brother out.
Okay, good. Right there.
I was also going to say that really everything that we do is not really enough, that it's Jesus and the Spirit continually sanctifying us. We need to, like Sharina was saying, keep working, striving to give it back to him, really, but he's the one that really sanctifies us. So
good. Do you think in this period, I mean, I don't know, I'm not going to put you on the spot, but in the last couple of years that you've maybe had a little bit more of a inclination to look at yourself, look at your spiritual life and say, okay, this is different than what we've been in before. How can I do better with it? How am I doing with it? Am I falling into a dark place? Am I finding myself being more introspective? Are there things that I can do when maybe I'm separated that really kind of lead me in a better path to be a better spiritual walker? Have you found yourself being more that way, or have you had a tendency to say, well, the rules are different now, and nobody's really kind of maybe checking on me quite as much as they did, or whatever it might be? Have you found that looking at yourself in the mirror has become more of a normal thing or less of a normal thing? And in doing that, purifying ourselves better.
I was going to say, I think that it's really enabled us, at least for me, and I know Richard personally, it's kind of taken us out of our regular routine and the people, and instead of making it like a checklist, we've really desired, I remember when we first started coming back together, sometimes we just get in these routines and, oh, we gotta go, and making blessings curses, and I know that it really caused us to desire to see people and to know how people were doing, and not just because we can worship God, with our family and study, but to be able to really see and worship with the community and the congregation, it really makes you see why God made it that way.
That desire to see each other. We don't desire to see people we don't love. I mean, we don't desire to go out of our way to find people that maybe we have things in contrast with. I mean, at least I don't. I mean, I want to see the people I love. I'm going to harken back very briefly. Last time you're going to hear about it. Last Sunday when I didn't feel well, I went back to bed after I contacted John. And I thought, if I feel better at 10, I'm going to get up and go. And I woke up at 10, which was a little bit late in the game to do that. But I found myself seriously missing you people. Hadn't seen you in 2 weeks, had been gone the week before. And that's a good miss. I mean, if we're gone and we don't miss, or if people are gone and we don't miss them, then that's something that really needs to work on correction, to really kind of look at. We need to grow closer to that. And it shows up through that love that really says, the people I want to be with, I want to encourage, that's part of the purification thing. Mine, through that, the biggest thing, I guess, if I've said there's been victories, is the instantaneous prayer thing. I wish I could tell you the 5 things I instantaneously stopped and prayed about this week in terms of relationships. Because if I did, you would think horribly about me. I mean, but one of them, I'll just tell you, one of them was about jealousy. You know, my wife came home and she spent some time. Well, okay, forget I even said that. I don't want you to know the circumstances. But we were talking about the fact that I have 3 brothers-in-law who have done wildly well financially. I have not. I mean, I'm not living in a poorhouse, but they've done incredibly well, and they can do some amazing things now. Being a school teacher for 45 years, and even watching our money or whatever, has not put me in that circumstance. And I found myself sitting there in my chair, thinking, "How is this?" I mean, momentarily, this isn't right. This isn't fair. And we talked. She and I talked it out. And I said, I need to pray. I mean, I need to pray to not have that. That's great what they're doing. I mean, all glory to God for them, and me to have a better heart about that whole thing. So there's one. That's the one I'm going to tell you about. But I don't know if I would have done that 2 years ago. I think maybe that would have festered a little bit, or maybe whatever. You know, just purifying ourselves, looking for ways to say, I can do that better. Is there any other thing that you want to add about how purifying ourselves grows into loving the church? Right there, Dennis.
I may see this a little bit differently. He's saying, now that you have purified yourselves, then love. I can almost hear somebody saying to Peter, as the rich young ruler said to Jesus, when Jesus said, if you want to enter the kingdom of heaven, you have to, and they discussed obeying the commandments, and the rich young ruler says, I've done all those things since I was a little kid. And Jesus said, okay, now leave everything you have and give it to the poor and come follow me. I can almost hear somebody saying to Peter, well, I've punched all the boxes. I've been baptized, I teach classes, I do this, I do that. What do I need to do now? And Peter's saying, love one another deeply. If you want to add something, if you want to be a child of God, in addition to all these nice things that you see as being pure, add love. Love one another deeply and mean it. And I like that word, deeply.
Yeah.
Really love one another, not just say, yeah, I love everybody and then go on home. But love one another deeply, mean it, do things for one another, share with one another, support one another. So.
No, and I think along that line, taking that one step further, well, not even take one step further, but it's easy to say love each other deeply, but when we look across the room, when we're all full, when we're all here, even when we're not here, loving each other deeply is easy on some people. I mean, it looks easy on some people. There's some people who are easy to love deeply. Others of us in our relationships, maybe it's a struggle. Maybe it's to say, they drive me crazy. I know I drive them crazy, whatever it might be. And yet if we're brothers and sisters, seeking ways to kind of knock that down and make it work is really, really kind of a critical thing, and a critical way to say, okay, I'm gonna move past where I was before. I had a great experience. I took these 100 people to DC 2 weeks ago. We just got back 2 weeks yesterday, and all the usual suspects seemed to go on the trip with me. The knuckleheads. None of the knuckleheads stayed home. All the knuckleheads went. And yet, in one respect, and again, this is Sally's greatness coming through. She goes, you have a chance to look at them in a different light now than away from campus. I go, yeah, I just hope it's not a police lineup, where they're doing some things. But it really is true. I mean, I saw a kid who's been just the thorn in my flesh all year. We had a kid one night who got sick, and this kid, the kid who's been the thorn, came down to my room through the graces of the hall guards and said, "Mr. Hawley, Ethan's throwing up. You probably need to come down and take a look at that." And I go, and he was right. And so we went down there, but when I got down there and we actually had a couple parents who were doctors on the trip and a nurse, and this all turned into a triage type situation. But the great thing about it was that kid, who's been a knucklehead all year to me, was a servant to the kid who was sick. I mean, he was the one who was going to get a bucket for the kid to throw up in, and one who went to get cold towels to put on his head. And I was graced an opportunity to see a kid in a way I hadn't seen before and throw away a little bit of my old feelings about him, because I've seen him rise to the occasion. And my blinders fell off a little bit about that. So I think that's exactly right, Dennis. I think that's a really good point. Okay, let's go to Hebrews 10, 24 and 25. I'm going to ask Myron to stay in. Where are you at, Myron? Somebody want to read that for me? You're going to get tired of my voice. Hebrews 10, 24, 25. Okay, right over here with Richard.
Which one?
Right there.
I can find it here. I'm good once I do. I think so. If I was a K-Stater, it'd be harder. Hebrews 10, 24 and 25. And let us consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds, not giving up meeting together as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching.
Okay. One of the things I think that we've looked at, is being more intentional in being in each other's lives after, when we're looking at trying to maybe get back to the way in some levels that are the best of what we did before, and maybe some things where we weren't as good before, about maybe being intentional about this. But this idea of spurring each other on, what does that look like to you? What does it look like to spur someone on to good works and good deeds? How do we do that? Michael?
Well, it's asking us to encourage, but when you think about a spur and what it is for, sometimes it's not always enjoyable, but it gets the movement going. And so I think to spur is to be involved in someone's life and may have to give them that nudge that they need to get them moving, which they may or may not appreciate always, but it's for a common good and good cause.
I think there's several levels to that. I think you're right. There are times when we don't want to hear the ugly truth or the nudge as you speak, and yet it may be very necessary. And if we love each other, then we're willing to do that. Like if one of my brothers or sisters says, "Hey, have you contacted so-and-so recently that's on your list?" And I know I haven't. I mean, they're not saying, by the way, the next step is you're marching towards Satan, whatever. That's not saying that, but they are pushing me in a direction to do what I should be doing already. That's one way to do it. The other way is by the example. I mean, there are so many of you who, with the lives that you live in tough circumstances from time to time, that you encourage by example. If you see somebody who's lived through a tough time, who's lived through a tough situation, who's struggled with children, who's struggled with relationship, who's struggled with a job, and yet you've risen with that and you've given a good example of what that looks like, that's an encouragement. What's the end result of that if we do that? What happens as a church if we do encourage each other, if we do kind of look at each other and say, let's kind of move on toward love and good deeds? What are the end results? What's the good deeds part of that? It's good deeds. What's the love part of that? Have you ever worked alongside somebody, maybe at a church thing that you didn't really know very well, and all of a sudden, you get a chance to, about 3 years ago, we were working on cleaning out bushes over here. And I don't remember who it was I was working with. This is terrible. I'm going to give you this example. And I can't remember who it was I was working with. But I remember that I didn't know them very well. And I managed to get a big old thorn in my finger. Of course I did. And they worked at getting it out quickly because they said, the longer it stays in there, the worse it's going to get. And in the course of all this, when they were ministering to my injury, we kind of had a little conversation. I learned some things that I didn't know before about them. So I wish I could say I love them. I do love them more. I just wish I could remember who they were. But the mindset of really kind of being drawn to them was really kind of a really, really good thing. So that's an important thing. Okay, look at John 13, 14, and 15. I got a reader. And then if you're not doing that one, look for the next one will be Acts 4:32. So right now we're looking at John 13, 14, and 15. Who's my reader? Okay, we're right over there, HC.
Yeah, HC. And since I, your Lord and your teacher, have washed your feet, you ought to wash each other's feet. I have given you an example to follow. Do as I have done to you. I tell you the truth. Slaves are not greater than their master, nor is the messenger more important than the one who sends the message. Now that you know these things, God will bless you for doing them.
Okay. Now this is obviously an interesting passage for us because I don't know if you've ever been involved. This is normally when I turn to Roy and have him tell his foot washing story, because I don't know how many of you have been involved in an actual foot washing. I'm not going to make you raise your hands, but we don't do that really physically ever. We had it done when I was a kid. We did a foot washing at East Hill Church of Christ in York, Nebraska, as part of it, and it was the most widely uncomfortable thing I think I'd ever really participated in. I was, I think, 11, and I think people were given the option to let their feet be washed or not be washed, and the majority would say no. I'd rather not that happen. But if we look past that particular thing, and you may say we can't look past that because washing feet is washing feet. But if we were to say something beyond that, what might washing somebody else's feet serve as a bigger premise for? John?
Thank you, sir. When you know it, he's sitting there with all the girls.
Thank you, Myron.
I sat down first. Not true. I've been a part of that a couple of times, and I wish that I was a part of it more often. But in Brazil, we were having an incredibly difficult time with a team member, and there was lots of circumstances that created the situation. Most of it was nonverbal, and so we were caught off guard with a couple of things. And I happened to be doing a small group with that particular person's, that was their circle of influence. And in the midst of, at the height of it, at the small group, I asked them if I could wash their feet. They let me wash one of them. I didn't get to wash both of them. But what I realize now is, to only reserve that for the most difficult of times is probably not the correct measure of this. This is. I was telling them I was willing to do anything to help them. And I should make that message clear. way before it gets serious. It should be something normative rather than very selected and very in very difficult situations. But it did help us.
Why, when Jesus does this, what is he in the eyes of his apostles doing here? What's his, they're looking at him, and what do you think they're thinking about what he's doing right there? Grace, yes? Very good. Yeah.
Jesus shouldn't be the one doing it. It should be a servant, not someone who is that they look up to like that.
So what's the message he's telling? What now? No one is above. And what's the message if we take it out of our washing feet, but just in general service, what are we looking at?
He's willing to go as far as he can and do anything to serve or get us to know how much he loves us.
Yeah. If you think, and I would say to me, this is a real obstacle. If I think something is below me, then I put a barrier between not only me and God, but I put a barrier between me and my brothers and sisters. Humbling ourselves, and putting ourselves in a situation where we're willing to be, I don't know what we're willing to be, but a great example for me is, and on those times when I traipse into the 4 and 5 year old Journey Through Judea room where I am totally out of my element, I don't have a thing that I think really I say to them that's relevant. They're 4 and 5. I barely, really can converse with a lot of adults. But in that particular case, I really feel like I'm not sure I'm making any kind of a difference there. But I think it's a big thing if we do step out of our what's convenient for us or what's easy for us and say, okay, I'm willing to serve in whatever way I possibly can. Any other thoughts there? Okay. Who is going to read the next one? Acts 4:32. Do we have a ready reader? There we go, June.
All the believers were one in heart and mind. No one claimed that any of their possessions was their own, but they shared everything they had.
Now, realizing, again, we're looking 2,000 years ago, but what does it mean to be all believers were one in heart and mind? When was the last time we were all one in heart and mind? Maybe this verse? Maybe just shortly thereafter. We struggle with everything with that. We believe different things in the world. We believe different things in the body. We do get our relationships sometimes twisted in terms of how we think about things, how we think about doctrine, how we think about this is the way we should do things. So that they probably had that as well. Even when they said they had all their possessions in common, there probably was some decisions about, well, here's how we're going to get rid of them. Here's how we're going to give them out. Here's what the procedure is going to be. Here's the protocol, so to speak. But if we were to be able to live that first line as a body, and when we were to say all believers were one in heart and mind, how do we get to that point as closely as we possibly can? Yes, Kathy?
To me right now, what's going on like every other Wednesday night, and you're there and everybody seems like they're on the same channel and they are happy to be there. They may be doing different things, but to me, that's what that's talking about. And I don't hear bad things, I hear good things, and I see people happy to be together, and it's wonderful.
Can I just say, I had not thought of that. That might be the perfect example. Everybody, when they come, when you're not forced to come, everybody when they come is there because they want to be, they know where they want to serve, they know they want to enjoy each other's company. And good comes out of that every single time. And you're right, they are of one mind. The one day we were doing stuff in here, I did walk into the door and say, that's probably not my ministry, but those filling out those cards that I can do. Cleaning up the trash, that I can do. I think that's a really good point, that finding that we can have areas where we really do find an area to serve and lift each other up. And you're right, when people walked in, nobody said, what are they doing here? Or, I wish they hadn't come or whatever. People took the time to come and say, this is my Wednesday night light family, one-time family. Let's make it work. Let's do everything we can do to make that good. And it was a great example of that. Yes.
I was just thinking of Jessica Hoggett. The very first Wednesday that she was out of the hospital, she was at that Wednesday night fellowship. Mm-hmm. And, I just think in her shoes, how appreciative she was of the unity of the body and the support that her family received. Mm-hmm. And she was wanting to be a part of that, to encourage others the way that we had encouraged her.
Let's camp there for just a minute. Because was there anybody here who really was against Jessica getting better? Probably not. I mean, we're probably all on the same page about prayers and cards and ministering to their family and whatever. That was pure. And that was an opportunity where everybody could agree, we want this to happen. Now, that's not going to be realistic that happens all the time. But we ought to seek those moments where those types of mindsets, those types of let's get on where we're pulling together, even if we might disagree in some area where we're not overwhelmed by, we're not going to come to a point where our love gets dwarfed, but instead our love gets magnified. And that's a really good point. Okay, somebody turn, if they would, to 2 Corinthians 7, 2 and 3. Oh yeah, Wednesday night light, this Wednesday. I was so anxious for it to be last Wednesday. I sent out a couple flyers saying, hey, we have a Wednesday night light tonight, don't we? No. And then somebody said, are you already at the building? And I might have been on the way. Okay. This could be a good plug for reading your announcements a little bit more closely. Is anybody ready to read this one? I'll read it. Okay, 2 Corinthians 7, 2 and 3. Make room for us in your hearts. We have wronged no one. We have corrupted no one. We have exploited no one. I do not say this to condemn you. I have said that before. You have such a place in our hearts that we would live or die with you. Live or die with you. There's a current little, I think some of you have posted on it, current little Facebook thing about check here if you would step in and die for your child. So far, I have not seen anybody say, no, I don't think I'd do that. I think I would, well, no, that nobody's done that. Obviously. I mean, that's a feeling that is deep and deep, deep, deep. But this one, he says right here, he says, when I says, I have said before that you have such a place in our hearts that we would live or die with you. That's a deep love, a deep love. And when it talks about the verse before about not corrupting, I've corrupted no one, I've exploited no one. That's a bold statement. We talked before about looking in the mirror and looking at our lives and saying, how have I been with people? That's, in order to be able to say that, I think you've had to have been able to be checking yourself and say, what's my relationship like with those people? What's my heart like with those people? Have I reached out to them? Have I forgiven them if they've sinned against me, even when they didn't know they were sinning against me or offended me? Not sinned so much. Have I done that kind of thing? Have I had that kind of a mindset? Well, what's this goal right here? What is the goal at the end of verse 3, starting in verse 2? What's that goal from all this behavior? Make room for us in your hearts. Can you remember the last time you asked somebody to make room for you in your heart, in their heart? Hopefully it happens a lot that we just do it. Like we look there and say, I love that person. I mean, they're so good, whatever it might be. But a lot of times it's maybe not an intentional part on ours to say, I really want us to have the kind of relationship that is so good and so deep and so reliable that when push comes to shove, we can say, I would live or die with you. Live or die. That's a strong statement. Okay, got a couple more. Let's turn to Romans 12, 4 and 5. Very famous, Romans 12, 4 and 5. Actually, we could read the whole chapter, but we'll just go with 4 and 5. And by the way, when we're reading this, think about us as a body. Think about what we do. Think about who we are as a body. Just as each of us has one body with many members, and these members do not all have the same function, so in Christ, we who are many form one body, and each member belongs to all the others. It's obvious. We don't do the same things. We don't have the same gifts. We don't have the same interests. Some of you, if somebody said, hey, will you teach a class? You'd say, yeah, I'd be happy to. Others of you would say, not in a million years if there's one other person in it, and that person's taking a nap. I mean, they wouldn't do that. They don't want, that's not a gift. That's not something they feel like is really a gift. Some people are incredible letter senders and card senders and encouragers, and others are people that may not necessarily shine until there's somebody in a hospital that needs a hand held. And then that's when their gift really kind of comes into play. If we're going to be an effective body and move on and be more effective every single day, recognizing that we don't all do the same thing, lifting each other up for the things that we do that are sometimes unnoticed or appear to be ungratified, would seem to me to be a really good thing. Now, Michael gets a lot of warm fuzzies. I mean, he's up every Sunday. 44 days a year, you're up on Sunday morning, 8 weeks, I'm just kidding. Some around 50 Sundays a year, he gets up and speaks. People are going to praise him for what he says. He's in front of everybody when he does that. He's going to get a lot of praise for that. Same with John. All of our ministers who are in front a lot are visible and they're seen. But there are people behind the scenes who sometimes do yeoman work, do fantastic work for the body to function properly, and may never really be acknowledged and recognized. And maybe even, if we're truthful, sometimes think, well, anybody could do that job. We can't. I mean, we need to be aware of the fact that we do have different strengths. And if we're going to be the best that we can be, utilizing those strengths and everybody feeling like they have a spot is really great. I mentioned about 8 weeks ago the encouragement that I got from Sharon making a couple of comments. And just comments of encouragement, not by the way, not toward me, but that would have been all right too, but just toward what we were talking about was huge. I mean, because she talked about, I believe if we're talking about teaching, and we teach in different ways, and we teach the way that we walk our walk, we teach the way that we show ourselves when we're in grief, or the way that we take care of our neighbor, or whatever it might be. Those are all critical ways of teaching. And acknowledging that is really, really a very, very critical thing. Okay, last one. Let's go with Colossians 3, 15 and 16. Let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, since as members of one body, you were called to peace. I want to stop right there for a minute. We were called to peace. We weren't called to bitterness, to strife, to argument. We were called to peace. And be thankful. Let the word of Christ dwell in you richly as you teach and admonish one another with all wisdom, and as you sing psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs with gratitude in your hearts to God. Now, the word admonishment is really pretty close to what we talked about earlier with spur each other on. When we admonish, there's a lot of ways we can do it. And some of them aren't necessarily as warm as others. But if we're loving each other, we need to do that. I think I've told this story so many times it's retired, but when 40 some years ago, and I had this thumb injury, this thumb disease, this paronychia, and I went to Randy to get it cut, or I tried to get Randy to do anything but cut it so that my thumb would feel better. And I said, is there any possible way we can do this without you having to slice that open? He goes, no. And he fixed it finally after all this gnashing of teeth and blah, blah, blah. And then at the end, he could have said, hey, congratulations, go on. But he also said, you might not want to do that again. You might not want to chew your nails so close that they cause an infection or whatever. So he did give me a gentle, now he didn't shake his finger at me. He didn't wag his fist at me, just a gentle admonishment. And you know what? 45 years later, never happened since. I feel like that's kind of a record of some type. But the admonishment there went a long way, and it kind of made me focus on that one particular thing. But when we're talking as brothers and sisters, look what ends up happening with this. Let the word of Christ dwell in you richly. Dwell in us richly. It can't dwell in us richly if we're not familiar with it, if we're not acquainted with it, if we're not talking about it, if we're not spurring each other on to good works. If the word of Christ lived in us richly, I think the difference in us as a body would be unbelievable. I think it dwells, like in anybody, somewhat richly. But getting to the point where, as was said earlier today, getting to the point where we really do that more and more and more, and that becomes way more of what we want to do, that's the goal. I appreciate over the last 13 weeks the fact that you guys have been incredibly good with your comments. We've looked at a lot of good things. It's made some incredibly great points. I'm looking forward to the next two classes that we have coming up starting next week. Thank you so much for all that you've done today. Enjoy each other's company, and you are dismissed.